So our next presentation is by Jackie Ayrault, and she is also looking at a population in need. And she and I both come from rural New York State.
I knew you were going to mention that we both came from rural New York State. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Chappell, for that intro. As he said, my name is Jackie, and I am here to present my thesis addressing chronic inflammation in the rural low-income United States, surprise, surprise, a therapeutic yoga program based on science, listening, and discernment. So when I came into this program, I came in with a goal, which you've probably heard this goal a few times, you just heard it from Laura as well, of easing the suffering of those around me, dukkha suffering, through the tools of yoga. And for this project specifically, I focused on an audience that I have familiarity with, as you already know, and that's the rural low-income United States. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of beauty and happiness in the rural low-income United States. However, there's also a lot of unnecessary suffering. So much like, I'll use the analogy of this old windmill here with this tail fin, I set out to find ways to ease the impact of the world on rural low-income US communities through the tools of yoga, yoga being the tail fin in this analogy. But first, of course, I needed to identify a problem that yoga could help ease, and that, as you know, became chronic inflammation. Thank you, Dr. Fazio, for pointing me in that direction. Briefly, chronic inflammation is inflammation in the body that lasts longer than is necessary to heal an acute condition or an injury like a cut or the common cold, and it can last from months to years. And if it's left untreated, it can lead to tissue damage and the development of one of various chronic diseases like diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and other autoimmune diseases, heart disease, and the list, I could go on for days on what it can lead to. On top of this, chronic inflammation, as well as these related diseases, often come with debilitating symptoms like chronic fatigue, chronic pain, sleep disturbances, mood disorders like depression, and stress. Chronic stress being a common comorbidity and a key contributor to the development of chronic inflammation. On top of this, according to the World Health Organization, we saw this quote from Alethea yesterday, approximately 74% of annual global deaths are attributed to chronic disease. And in the United States, chronic disease is the leading driver of our massive annual healthcare costs. And much of this $4.1 trillion comes from individuals in underserved communities, like low-income communities. So why the focus on rural low-income US communities? Well, rural communities tend to be lower income than other communities in the United States, which leads to less access to health and wellness resources. They're less likely to have health insurance, and all of this combined means that they are more highly impacted by chronic disease. For instance, adults in rural US communities have a 150% higher incidence of chronic respiratory diseases. They also have higher incidence of heart disease, arthritis, diabetes, and cancer. On top of this, they're more likely to die prematurely than the urban counterparts of many of these chronic diseases. So all of this to say that something needs to be done about the suffering that is being experienced in the rural low-income United States when it comes to chronic disease and therefore chronic inflammation. And my hypothesis is that a therapeutic yoga program may be able to help. And that's because yoga has been shown, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, to help alleviate symptoms of chronic inflammation as well as downregulate chronic inflammation. However, at the same time, therapeutic yoga programs are designed in such a way as to help individuals find ways to better cope with their symptoms and also to eliminate the risk of developing chronic inflammatory diseases in the future. So I set out on my path to develop a therapeutic yoga program for addressing chronic inflammation in rural low-income US communities, a bit of a mouthful there. And I did that through science, Shravana, the act of hearing or listening, and Viveka, discernment. And just as an aside, both Shravana and Viveka are tools on the yogic path to help one find or gain true knowledge on their path to liberation. And in this context, we're trying to gain true knowledge to help others find liberation from suffering. I will discuss, there's much more about that in my thesis. I won't discuss it too much today, but I will, as we go through the rest of the presentation, just explain where they came into play. Okay, so first the science, the secondary research. There's a lot of research out there. Yogic science was investigated. Modern medical science was investigated, scientific studies were investigated. I don't have time again to go through all of those things, but I thought it would be helpful to just give an overview of some of the themes coming out of the scientific research on yogic interventions and how it may be able to help, as it was used in the development of this program. So there are various studies, like those included in this systematic review by Jalova and colleagues, that show that yoga in combination, and I should say yoga is many things, right? But usually these studies have yogasana, which is postural yoga, pranayama, breath work, and meditation. And it shows that some combination of these tends to do something, it tends to help in some way to downregulate inflammation in the body through improvement of inflammatory biomarkers. There are also many studies that have shown that yoga has the potential to alleviate symptoms of chronic inflammatory diseases in various chronic inflammatory diseases, like irritable bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, and heart disease, just to name a few. Yoga has also been shown to help alleviate pain in various conditions, as well as both the psychological and physiological symptoms of stress. Stress, again, being a common comorbidity and driver of chronic inflammation. One thing that I did want to note about all of this research is that while there is a lot of research and there is a lot of evidence, just making sure everything's okay. Okay. The researchers, oh, I see. There's something going on with the cursor. Okay, the researchers have noted that we good? Okay. The researchers have noted that there is a need for larger research as well as more transparency into the interventions that are included in these studies so that we can more definitively say that yoga can help and say how yoga can help. However, the research to date is promising and has been used quite a bit in the development of the current program. But more research is needed. There's always need for more research. One other thing I did want to note about these research studies was that very few of them were among low-income communities, and even fewer were among rural communities. So there is a gap in the research as it pertains to this particular project. Which leads me to the Shravana, or primary research, the listening Shravana part of this research. And this is where I set out to really hear from rural low-income communities what they want and need and what would work for them when it comes to helping ease their suffering as it pertains to chronic inflammatory diseases. So more specifically, I developed a plan to uncover the unique needs, interests, barriers, and motivators to wellness programs, including yoga programs in these areas, as well as to assess the acceptability and feasibility of implementing a yoga program specifically for addressing chronic inflammatory disease in these areas. So, would a yoga program even be accepted in the rural low-income United States? What would the barriers be? What would the motivators be? It seemed highly risky to develop a program and then implement it in the rural low-income United States and just expect it to go well without first talking to them about what they want and need. We don't know a lot about them, unfortunately, in the research. So in this IRB-approved studies, I spoke to 5 wellness program leaders from throughout the rural low-income United States. And then based on those interviews, a survey was developed, and then distributed online via Qualtrics to rural low-income individuals. One thing that you may note here is that there's a lot of representation from the South, and that is because the rural low-income United States is primarily in the South. The way that I have defined it is rural community with at least 20% of the population living below the poverty line. And so they're primarily in the South, 80% of them about. The other thing to note is that we have an overrepresentation of females in the survey results. That was not planned. So I did a separate analysis to just uncover where females may be driving up or down the results. I call that out on slides in this section, but I don't have time to go through that analysis in detail today. Otherwise, these rural low-income individuals were a nationally represented rural sample of adults, low income, and 58.5% of them had been diagnosed with a chronic inflammatory disease. And that was just natural fallout on that one. So this is some really key top line findings. There's a lot more in the thesis. These are things I thought you might find interesting, as well as things that helped in the development of this program. But you can read the thesis if you want to know more, and maybe some upcoming articles, hopefully. So the first thing that I noticed was while the top barrier, the top barrier to wellness program participation in these communities, according to the survey results, is just not being aware of the fact that programs like this exist. However, once you get over that barrier, that's when cost and location become key to program participation. As you can see here, having a program be free makes sense that it would be a top motivator, right, for participation in a program. However, when it's not free, that's when price becomes a barrier. Similarly, convenient location is a top motivator. However, when the location isn't convenient, then lack of transportation becomes a barrier. And one thing that we heard in the separate expert interviews was that not a lot of people in rural low-income communities have vehicles. And when they do have vehicles, they don't necessarily have the money to continue to buy gas to be coming to programs such as this. So they try to find convenient locations as much as possible. So highly important. One other interesting thing that came out of the motivators is this notion that friend and family participation could be something that would motivate people to come into a program. In fact, 41.5% of these rural low-income US adults noted that providing a sense of community was a highly appealing benefit of a wellness program. However, at the same time, 12.3%, or I should say this a little differently, it was the third most likely to also be rated as not appealing. So this also points to something that was seen in the survey results. And that was that while 4 out of 5 of the experts that I interviewed said community, socialization are key to the success of our program. That's why we do so well with this program. This is a quote that is an example of that. Some of them also mentioned that some people come to rural communities to be alone. They don't want to be involved in the community, and they don't want to necessarily come to programs like this. It can be hard to get them in. So overall, what this is really saying is that community is a motivator for some, but not for everyone. And I think the takeaway is that you can use community as a motivator. However, maybe not so much as something to bring people in as just to keep people coming back to the program. There may be other more important things to get rural low-income individuals interested. Things like promises of better sleep, pain reduction, boosting energy, improving overall well-being, and reducing stress. These were the things that were identified as the most appealing benefits by the rural low-income adults. Jumping into yoga specifically, while there is some program interest, yoga program interest in these areas, and some positive opinion, there's room to grow these things, right? While there's 30.1% interest in a yoga program, there's 52.5%, whoops, I knew I was gonna do that, I'm trying to do this. There's 52.5% positive opinion. So how can we grow this interest to be more in line with this? And how can we grow this neutral opinion up to the positive, or at least generate more interest? Well, we could just remind them of the things they already know. Most of the rural low-income adults agree that yoga has fitness, stress, pain, and health benefits. However, there is confusion about what yoga is and who can do it. So this may be holding them back a little bit. For instance, 60% agree that yoga is primarily about stretching muscles, which shows that they may be thinking more about yogasana, postural yoga, and not other types of yoga, or other practices of yoga, I should say. And also that they're not thinking necessarily beyond just the stretching of the muscles benefit. There's so many other benefits of asana. In addition, while 48.2% said that yoga was accessible to them, still 21.9% disagreed. And they were relatively split on whether or not yoga was for fit people. So this actually aligns with something else that was heard in the interview results with the experts. And that was when we first started talking about yoga, I was hearing a lot of, yoga is for this specific subset of my population. Yoga is for women. Yoga is for younger adults. Yoga is for fit and agile individuals. It wasn't until we had a chance to talk more about what might be included in a program that they realized, oh, there's so much more to yoga and so many more people can do it than I thought. So education is going to be needed. And this Southern expert specifically recommended doing information sessions prior to the program to really talk to the community about what would be involved and who could do it, what the benefits are, and maybe even talk to them about what they think would work for them and what might not, and make adjustments as necessary. So that was really quick, some of the top line insights. There will be more in this next section. Just I'll briefly mention, but we won't be going through them in as much detail. And here I'm just going to give you an overview of the program as it currently stands. And it was developed with Viveka, Discernment, taking that secondary research, scientific research, as well as the primary research, and developing a program that is hopefully seen as accessible, acceptable, and beneficial in these areas. So first, based on the insight I was just talking to you about, the plan is to have information sessions within 2 weeks of the program start. Based on some other research results we didn't go through, the program is going to be 8 weeks. We've heard 8 weeks a lot over the last 2 days, so makes sense that we would go with 8 weeks. In-person 60 to 90-minute workshops at a central location. We talked about why that's important. And because these are low-income communities, the hope is that we can offer the program for free and provide a gift card incentive to try to get around that transportation barrier, or at least to help with food insecurity, as that is another major issue in these areas identified in the interviews. In regards to the overall theme of the program, the survey respondents were shown 3 different descriptions of a potential program. I'm not showing you the full descriptions here today, but as you can see, one was overtly focused on stress relief, one on chronic inflammation, and one on chronic disease. However, they were all focused on chronic inflammation in some way in the description. As you can already see, the one that was most preferred was the stress relief description. This result, as well as the fact that chronic stress is a common comorbidity and contributor to chronic inflammation, as well as the survey results showing that stress relief is an appealing benefit, led me to choose that as the focus of this program. This is the current title. You'll notice that Boost Emotional Wellbeing has been replaced by Improve Overall Wellbeing, just because Improve Overall Wellbeing generally performed better in the survey. But there will be some more specific secondary benefits that also you saw earlier performed well in the survey in terms of appeal that will be included in promotional materials. In terms of weekly elements, there will be applied yoga philosophy. This will include discussion and self-reflection of concepts such as ahimsa, non-harm. And the participants will also have the chance to embody these applied yoga philosophy topics in the weekly pranayama, breathwork, and asana postural yoga practices. These were chosen for their many benefits, some of which are highlighted here, but there's much more in the research that you could read in the thesis, as well as the fact that the interviewed experts all agreed that these would pull people in. These would be interesting to their community. One thing that I did want to note here with these grayed out is that some of the experts did mention that some of their community members may still think that asana is not accessible to them. So the plan is to offer chair yoga in week 1 of the program, maybe even introduce it in the information sessions, and then offer it throughout as needed based on participant needs. Meditation will also be included. There were mixed results when I talked to the interviewees about meditation. So the plan, and also meditation is a more challenging practice. I could go through the reasons why, but I don't have time to right now. So the plan is to focus on beginner meditation, not medication, focusing on guided body scans and those applied yoga philosophy topics, and not starting on meditation until week 3. Plan is also to include some nutrition education in the program, since poor nutrition is a key contributor to chronic inflammation and an issue in these areas. I am looking for a partner to help build out this part of the program. If you know anyone, send them my way. Many other things I could say, no time to say them now. Just letting you know that the plan is to pilot this program in a couple of areas, hopefully do some bigger research, and then offer it throughout the United States as an evidence-based program to rural, low-income US adults like this survey respondent, to help them find ways to better cope with their symptoms and hopefully eliminate or reduce the risk of developing chronic inflammatory disease in the future. Thank you. Oh, one thing that I really quickly wanted to say is I did get grants for that research, the Seidler Scholarship, the DEI LMU Scholarship, and the Lens Grant. So thank you so much for that. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to do any of this.